The Power to Destroy, by Anna von Reitz. Information provided to H.E. Cardinal Mamberti and the Vatican Chancery Court in regard to our claims, March 6, 2005, January 19, 2023, in Seek. In the American government, the state holds the national jurisdiction of the soil and the state holds the international jurisdictions, so although the states and living people receive the benefit of federal services, the responsibility of contracting for and payment for those services remains with the states. Having gotten a constitution in place and therefore, a contract to provide the 18 stipulated and enumerated services associated with the, also, enumerated powers, the federal subcontractors were loath to revisit any aspect of it. The three federal constitutions were to be enshrined as holy scriptures, and obeyed to the letter, so far as the rights and prerogatives of the subcontractors were concerned, including freedom from state taxation, a topic which was never actually discussed in the constitutions. However, in a famous 1819 decision, McCulloch v. Maryland, the Marshall-led Supreme Court agreed that the states of the Union retained no right to tax the federal service providers, which were to be considered part of the government, immune to taxation despite their nature as private foreign subcontractors. Chief Justice John Marshall famously declared that the power to tax was the power to destroy. So how did the federal subcontractors presume the power to tax their employers, the states and people of this country, for their services, when the states are only obligated to pay in gold or silver? There is no constitutional agreement for our states to submit to taxation imposed by any federal subcontractor and no allocation of our credit to them made under any federal constitution. Instead, the federal constitutions all established a very simple quid pro quo. The subcontractors provide the stipulated services, and the states provide gold or silver as payment. No service, no gold, and equally, no gold, no service. In the confusion coming out of the so-called American Civil War, states were denied access to their own assets by unauthorized territorial state-of-state organizations. These foreign state-of-state franchises of the British Crown District of Columbia, INC, cashiered our assets via the establishment of unauthorized state trusts. This was the beginning of all the blocked and off-ledger physical asset accounts in the banking system. The banks and unauthorized territorial state-of-state organizations conspired to lock down our accounts for us, while conveniently also controlling our assets for us, without our permission and without public disclosure. Thus, the constitutional contracts were rendered inoperable through no fault of the states, and logically, if they had been operating honestly and in good faith, the usurping federal subcontractors should have left our shores and our assets to our own management, but instead, they stayed, acted as executors de son tort, and unilaterally decided to accept our credit as payment for their services. To this day, no shadow of a mutual agreement allowing the federal subcontractors to tax the states or anyone living in the states exists, yet federal taxation is ubiquitous and has been attached to nearly everyone and everything, either directly, or indirectly through their veiled state-of-state franchise operations. How is this possible? More deceit, non-disclosure, bad faith, manipulation, and all predicated on the unlawful and undisclosed conversion of the natural political status of Americans to that of federal dual citizenry, the lost territorial U.S. citizens and the public interest municipal persons the perpetrators created to act as their franchises out of thin air. The municipal and British Crown corporations housed in the District of Columbia and their deceitfully undisclosed state-of-state franchises which have been illegally and unlawfully acting for us in each one of our states, have been mischaracterizing Americans as federal citizenry of one kind of another for decades. This fundamental big lie and personage scheme has allowed the perpetrators to effectively tax us as federal citizenry residing in the states, and to coercively subject us to their foreign laws within our borders, and all while pretending to address us as their own citizens, which we are not and have no cause or desire to be. The means by which Americans were coerced and herded into appearing to accept federal citizenship obligations all took place under color of law and under conditions of deceit and non-disclosure. For example, the only public notice provided by Franklin Delano Roosevelt to the effect that he was selling, as slaves, and offshoring all the municipal citizens of the United States came as cryptic statements made in his first inaugural address, which included references to sacrifice and consecration and clearinghouse certificates, that is, birth certificates, which made no sense at all to any average American. Similarly, in dozens of premeditated and undisclosed registration and enrollment processes, Americans were asked if they were citizens of the United States, which they naturally interpreted as the name of their country, the United States, and the concept and meaning of citizenship was not disclosed to them at all. As another example, Americans were told, under color of law, that they had to sign up for a Social Security number in order to have a job. They were not told that this requirement applied only to federal employees, and only some federal employees at that. As a result, millions upon millions of Americans have been enrolled in a federal pension scheme and subjected to a federal tax on the privilege of federal employment purportedly taking place in Washington, D.C., Puerto Rico, Guam or American Samoa. While never actually being federal employees, never exercising any privilege, never receiving a dime's worth of federal income and never working in the geographical confines specified. They and their private sector employers have been charged 7.5% of their total earnings, plus an equal 7.5% employer contribution, an amount equivalent to 15% of their lifetime earnings for a shoddy, substandard, federal retirement benefit program that they weren't technically eligible to participate in. Again, how is this fraud and pillaging possible? The municipal corporation franchises named after each American have been housed in the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico, where they specialize in the illegal, in the 50 states, and unsavory business of child labor contracting. These are all commercial corporation fraud schemes applied against Americans who are owed good faith service and their private sector employers who are also being unlawfully and immorally taxed by these foreign municipal and British Crown subcontractors housed in the District of Columbia. We wish for the unauthorized state trusts to be dissolved in our favor, and for all our blocked asset accounts and credit accounts to be returned to us, both individually and to the lawful government owed to this country. We wish for the federal persons that have been attached to us under conditions of bad faith and non-disclosure, and which have been deceitfully promoted under color of law, to be dissolved in our favor, and for all legal presumptions misapplied to Americans who are not actually federal employees and who are not actually, knowingly, freely and consensually adopting the status of federal persons, to be disallowed with prejudice. We wish for an end to all these fraudulent revenue collection schemes and for the victims of these artifices, meaning both the unique individuals and their private sector employers who have been misrepresented and mischaracterized and forced to contribute to these and other federal programs under color of law, to receive prepaid credit accounts to discharge all municipal and territorial charges and expedite receipt of any service they may require and may not have access to as a result of federal corporation bankruptcies or other gratuitous debt dumping engaged in by these criminals. We wish for the banks to take immediate corrective action to release our accounts and expedite our use of our assets and the restored credit resources owed to us without further excuse or delay. As we never consensually agreed to be taxed by our employees nor to extend our credit to them in exchange for their services, and as we were prevented from making actual payment by the perpetrators themselves unlawfully seizing upon our assets to create state trusts which they have controlled and benefited from, we wish for amends to be applied to our accounts and correction applied to our status. We are not now and have never been debtors or paupers. We have been non-consensually misrepresented and defrauded by foreign municipal and British Crown corporations housed in the District of Columbia, all operating in breach of trust and violation of their service contracts. We wish for our good names, credit, and control of our physical assets to be restored, and for the offending municipal and British Crown corporations to be forfeited to us or liquidated, as common sense and prudence dictate. We wish for all unlawful publication, collection, and enforcement of federal taxes taking place within the borders of our physical states to stop, along with all federal tax-related prosecutions against Americans living within the borders of our states. Generations of Americans have been bullied and coerced under color of law to pay taxes and mortgages they don't owe, by these same subcontractors acting in breach of trust and violation of their service contracts. This amounts to illegal, unlawful, and non-consensual foreign taxation being misapplied within the states of the Union, and it is a crime under international law. We have demonstrated the criminal and self-interested nature of these federal subcontractors, and attest to their unlawful activities carried out against ourselves and many other nations over the course of 5 centuries. These municipal and British Crown corporations have consistently abused the public trust, maliciously defrauded their employers, and dishonored their contracts. We see no reason for their continued existence. We wish for the return of all federal taxes and asset forfeitures which have been unlawfully assessed against Americans who have, in turn, been mischaracterized as any species of federal citizenry, Americans who have suffered entrapment schemes and non-disclosure and worse, at the hands of undeclared foreign agents, including but not limited to Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant also known as Hiram Grant, William H. Seward, Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Richard M. Nixon, Barack Hussein Obama, and their heirs and successors, employees, agents and affiliates. We retain the right to tax and impose regulation on all and any foreign corporations, including commercial corporations and governmental services corporations operating at any location within the borders of our states. We retain the right to dissolve any and all federal enclaves that have been non-consensually established, operated in violation of their use permits, operated in violation of constitutional limitations, or that exist because of assumptions of custodial or successor interests on the part of municipal and British Crown corporations that have usurped against us. This includes but is not limited to the District of Columbia and the City of Washington, D.C., some federal post offices, post roads, and sea lanes, ports, bridges, military encampments and district management areas, railroad, highway and utilities easements and associated facilities, free trade zones, national parks, university grounds, public land trusts, game management areas, soil and water conservation districts, and similar grants and acquisitions made under non-existent custodial and emergency managements authorities assumed by the officers and personnel of the municipal and British Crown corporations housed in the District of Columbia. We do not recognize any contractual obligation on our part to continue doing business with corporations that have evaded and dishonored and deliberately disabled their own service contracts. We do not recognize any substantive debt alleged against our states or any private contractual obligation resulting from conferred or deceitfully obtained foreign citizenship obligations foisted off on Americans under color of law. We do not accept any allegation or commercial claim of default or dishonor on our part resulting from unauthorized interference in our affairs by officers of our erstwhile British Crown and municipal corporation subcontractors seeking to illegally, unlawfully, and immorally control our assets to create a default and otherwise to benefit themselves in breach of trust. We do not recognize any unilateral, merely implied, or non-consensual obligations resulting from the exercise of self-interest. This includes any presumed contract obligating federal employees to accept our purloined credit as legal tender bonded on a non-existent public interest in private assets, that is, the illegal securitization and bonding of living flesh under false presumptions of foreign citizenship obligations, fraudulent debts created by preventing their payment, and similar commercial fraud and mischief promoted by the British Crown and municipal corporations housed in the District of Columbia. We do not recognize any custodial interest or role for our municipal and British Crown Corporation employees beyond that established by the Northwest Ordinance, which provides for territorial occupation prior to enrollment of new states of the Union, and those resulting from treaty agreements. We hereby provide the Court with notice that all 50 states, including the Western states, have been formally accepted and enrolled as actual nation-states of the Union and as state members of our Federation effective with the 1st of October 2020 and are no longer in any form or under any obligation of territorial statehood at all. We have honored the Residence Act of 1790 and the grant of federal regulation of alcohol, tobacco and firearms, which are the only substances that the federal subcontractors are allowed to regulate. We continue to honor the intent of the Interstate Commerce Clause, but do not accept the widespread misinterpretation of it to allow the federal subcontractors any power to obstruct either trade or commerce within the United States. We do not recognize any power conferred on any Congress by any constitution to address our sexual preferences or health decisions or religious beliefs or banking preferences or other similar issues within the realm of our privacy with any acts of legislation whatsoever. Likewise, we do not recognize executive orders issued by a British Crown Corporation officer to his employees as any form of authority related to us, and we object to having executive orders and mandates of foreign governments presented to us as if we were obligated to obey them. We are exempt from any authority belonging to our federal employees, except in those few and extremely limited circumstances explicitly described by our written contracts and treaties. Any other assumption is uncalled for, inappropriate, and unwelcome. For example, if our British Crown Corporation employees should declare war against the toothpaste brand favored by our municipal corporation employees, we cannot be assumed to have any position related to their nonsense or responsibility for their self-engendered mercenary conflict, but their principals and officers are responsible for keeping their commercial spats off our land and soil and avoiding any injury to their employers. We do recognize the binding public contract established by President Andrew Johnson guaranteeing peace on the land and obligating all officers of the British Territorial United States government to provide the law of peace to all non-combatant Americans then and grandfathered in forevermore. The American Civil War was an illegal commercial mercenary conflict and it has been over for more than 150 years. We wish for everyone everywhere to know and acknowledge and accept these facts, and stop trying to promote any additional such wars against anything or anyone, including wars against poverty, wars against drugs, or any other similar specious pretense of war of any kind, or attempting to evoke any continuation of wars long dead and gone, as an excuse to maintain a British Crown Corporation occupation of our land and soil. Using territorial forces or a municipal corporation occupation of our land and soil using municipal federal civil service employees, either. We are occupying our land and soil and our federal republic, and neither our erring British Crown Corporation subcontractors nor our run-amok municipal corporation subcontractors need to think anything more about it. The greatest and longest-running war fraud in world history is over. Our lawful government is in session, and it's the responsibility of all federal employees to keep the peace from now on. Issued by Anna Maria Riesinger, Fiduciary. The United States of America in care of Box 520994 Big Lake, Alaska 99652. April 10, 2023. Thank you for liking and subscribing. For more information about the great fraud that has been perpetrated against the American states and people, and what you can do about it, please visit www.tasa.americanstatenationals.org. Thank you.